Hi, I'm Janet from New Zealand. I think the biggest news here is that the Ministry of Health has released a position statement and an evidence brief about puberty blockers. Now, this has been awaited for a long time. They were originally going to release it last September, and they kept on delaying it. One of the reasons for the delay was that they were waiting to hear what the CAS report were going to say. And after the CAS report was released around about April, they still didn't. Well, they actually wrote a statement, a media release, but then they never actually released it. So finally, in November, they have actually released their position statement and evidence brief. Now, it's at first sight, it looked quite good. I thought it looked quite good at first, but when you look at it more carefully, it starts to come across as rather like waffle. It seems like they're still pussyfooting around a lot, and there's nothing very concrete which indicates a commitment that they're really going to make any serious changes. They've also, because they're now admitting that what they do admit now is that in the evidence review, they say there's a lack of good quality evidence for the effectiveness of or safety of puberty blocking treatment in young people with gender dysphoria. And they don't have evidence that the medicines will improve longer-term outcomes for young people with gender-related health needs, nor that the potential longer-term risks are low. So that sounds pretty good. And then they say they're going to have more clarity in their guidance for medical practitioners and, be more precautionary. But there's just nothing concrete there which shows how they're going to do that. And one of the things they say is that treatment should be started only by prescribers who are experienced in gender affirming care and working as part of an interprofessional team. Well, that's what's happening now, and it's the people who are experienced in gender affirming care, so to speak, who are the ones promoting it and the most keen on it. And so they're saying, yes, families should and patients should be fully informed about the lack of evidence. But that they seem to think that, and Joe Bourne more or less said this in an interview. He's the chief medical officer of the Ministry of Health. He was interviewed by the Leah Panapa in the platform, and he was saying, oh yes, now they can make an informed decision. But his sort of idea of an informed decision meant that the person making the decision knows that there's no information actually. So that's what's called being informed. And it was interesting in that interview because eventually he did it. He was sort of pushed by the interviewer to say whether he would let his own child take puberty blockers if it was advised by the experts, and he said he would. And I think so a lot of the feminist response has been that this is sort of like a wet squib, as one person put it, and that Resist Gender Education, Aotearoa said, is this really an improvement, or is it not? And or is it just spin, a win or just spin, they were asking. So I think we still have to see. And they have called for a consultation. And there's an opportunity for people to send in submissions, and the consultation finishes in late January, 20th of January. Now, in one way, that's good because it means that people who are concerned can send in more of their concerns. But on the other side of it, it's another delay, which is what the Women's Rights Party pointed out with their press release, that this means there's now another 2 months at least where children just keep on getting prescribed these puberty blockers sort of unrestricted. So the consultation is about, should we have further regulations and restrictions? And so it's possible that they may come up with some actual restrictions after all the consultation. but they have already been informed by the Cass report and they know what's going on overseas. One thing that Joe Bourne said was that he said the only evidence that we have, which is reliable, is that these puberty blockers do cause bone density problems. And he didn't admit that there was any evidence that they cause fertility issues, which I find really bizarre because it seems to me that the evidence of fertility problems is very strong. And he must know that. And he also seems to be saying that New Zealand children are kind of different. We're not the same as the rest of the world. We're better, and we didn't have just one clinic like the UK did, and that's why things are better here. But that also seems to fly in the face of statistics we have, which say that New Zealand children have been taking puberty blockers at about 10 times the rate per head of population than the UK is doing. So yeah, we'll just have to wait and see, I think. Of course, the biggest puberty blocking organisation which is promoting it, which is PATHA, which is similar to WPATH. They don't like the idea of the consultations. They're a bit worried about that. But I think the Ministry of Health is pretty much saying that they're really interested to hear from people already doing the gender care or receiving it, and they haven't said they want to hear from people who are critical of it. But of course, they will hear from critical people as well. So yeah, so it's a wait and see, I think. Personally, I think, oh yeah, it's like this tiny step forwards, but it's clear they don't really, it's very reluctantly taken. And I think there's it's evidence that there are a lot of trans activists within the Ministry of Health actually who really don't want to have to shift, but they sort of realize they're going to have to slightly because of what's happened worldwide. So that's that item of news. Now, another news item is that the association, I always get the letters around the wrong way, Association of Psychotherapists Aotearoa New Zealand, APANZ, they used to be called New Zealand Association of Psychotherapists. They have released a position statement about puberty blockers in the same week. And they are actually now, they did a first draft last October and they've strengthened that. And they're taking a very hardline approach, saying that all of their therapists, they absolutely must really affirm gender identity. They cannot question it or be critical of it, because that would be a prejudice on the part of the therapist if they were to do that. And they even need re-education and psychotherapy themselves if they still want to question it. So that is pretty alarming. Which is what the Free Speech Union said. They put out a statement saying how alarmed they were about that. And yeah, the reasoning of the Psychotherapist Association is pretty wrong, faulty. I'll put a link up to what they say. And another thing they say, they're claiming that you have to affirm gender because that's the way to respect the Treaty of Waitangi. And they're going on about Maori sexualities, Indigenous gender identities, and Takatapui. Now, this is nonsense because actually there's no evidence that traditional Maori society had any recognition of transgender identities at all. They did recognize different sexualities without calling them that. This is where the word takatapui comes in, which means an intimate companion of the same sex. So that looks like, that was pretty a normal part of Maori society to have an intimate companion of the same sex, but there's nothing about transgender. There's no evidence of that in traditional Maori society. So it's a misrepresentation of the Treaty of Waitangi to say you have to affirm it if you want to follow the treaty. And the other thing is that they don't seem to notice that gender transition is a conversion practice. Like we have this Conversion Practices Prohibition Legislation Act, which forbids conversion practices. That came in a couple of years ago. And of course, the APA-NZ is saying we must follow the law on this. But of course, transition is conversion, as we know. It's especially conversion of potentially gay children. And of course, putting this kind of ban on sort of questioning gender at all means it's very hard for a therapist to support detransitioners. And they talk about strengthening their relationship with trans and gender diverse communities. So that shows their sort of bias, actually. So 2 items there about the puberty blockers, really. And then a couple of items about in relationship to violence against women. There was just a couple of very short items. Now, one is that the teen prostitution ring has been uncovered and actually had some prosecutions, which is a good thing. But I was talking to Ali Marie Diamond, who's from Wahine Toa Rising, and she says, well, it's just the tip of the iceberg, and it's just an indication of that, in fact, it's a terrible problem, and she's not particularly still feeling pretty sad about the whole thing, actually. And the other thing is apparently we're about to introduce a law about stalking, which should be a good thing. And there was a news item about this young woman who'd been stalked for 7 years by someone she barely knew and was absolutely distraught about it. And the police did very little to help her. And eventually a prosecution was so pathetic that, he only got community service for a few months. And that was a really eye-opening story that she told, which was in Stuff, which is a publication which considers itself to be progressive. Unfortunately, Stuff, so that was a great article, but Stuff is very opposed to gender critical feminism. So it's like, on the one hand, they want to be anti-violence, and on the other hand, they oppose, obviously, what is really important, women's sex-based rights and spaces. So it's a bit of a contradiction there. But anyway, that's it from New Zealand. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's Carrie from the US. Last Monday, Republican Representative Nancy Mace of South Carolina kicked off a political firestorm by filing a resolution that would prohibit House members, officers, and employees from using single-sex facilities other than those corresponding to their sex in the Capitol or in House office buildings. The measure seemingly is in response to the recent election of Sarah Tim McBride, a man who claims to be a woman, to serve as the representative for Delaware's at-large congressional district. Rep. Mace says that as a feminist and survivor of sexual violence and abuse, she will always unapologetically protect women in vulnerable places like our locker rooms, restrooms, and sports teams. Unsurprisingly, by Tuesday, she was receiving death threats for her advocacy on behalf of women and girls, one of which she shared on X. On Wednesday, she responded to the threats by doubling down with a new bill called the Protecting Women's Private Spaces Act that would protect women's single-sex spaces not only at the Capitol, but on all federal property across the country. Also on Wednesday, House Speaker Mike Johnson issued a statement announcing that all single-sex facilities in the Capitol and House office buildings, such as restrooms, changing rooms, and locker rooms, are reserved for individuals of that biological sex, while also noting that each member office has its own private restroom and unisex restrooms are available throughout the Capitol. He concludes, women deserve women's only spaces. Encouragingly, despite the ongoing venom directed her way by the usual suspects, Rep. Mace isn't showing any signs of backing down. On the 21st, an emergency court hearing was held in Denver to address the lawsuit filed by over a dozen female NCAA volleyball players against the Mountain West Conference and SJSU, challenging policies that allow a male player to compete on the women's team and seeking injunctive relief prior to the Mountain West Conference volleyball tournament scheduled to begin tomorrow in Las Vegas. Per the Icon's press release, plaintiffs sought to have the MWC declare male athlete Blair Fleming ineligible to compete, to overturn losses for teams that refused to compete against him, and to void wins for SJSU where he participated. Sadly, yesterday the U.S. District Court for the District of Colorado issued a decision denying them that relief. The plaintiffs immediately filed a notice of emergency appeal with similar demands to the 10th Circuit to address the Mountain West Conference continuing violations of Title IX and the rights of women in advance of the tournament, which again is scheduled to begin tomorrow. Got a link to the filing here, and I'll put those notes in the chat in a minute. And finally, closer to home for me, last week, the Watertown Unified School District Board in my state of Wisconsin voted on changes to the district's administrative procedural guidelines for gender and support plans. The new policy includes the following. It ensures students use locker rooms and restrooms based on their biological sex, a provision that would not compel staff to use a pronoun or name other than a student's legal name, and a requirement that students play sports consistent with their biological sex. And that's all I have today. Thank you.
Greetings from Australia. A former McDonald's employee who was featured on popular News Light program The Project, Caden Manuel, a young man who poses as a woman, runs an OnlyFans account and boasts of having sex with hundreds of young male school graduates during the schoolies period, where graduates go on holidays and party for a week or three, has been kicked out of his Airbnb on the Gold Coast for filming pornographic videos with the young men there. He's been housed in a new property by a person who supports his pornographic videos and sex by deception of young men celebrating the end of high school. The Daily Mail has reported on this using she and female language for him. Apparently, 55 young men in the first weekend of schoolies this year have been engaged in sex acts by him and filmed. I don't have any good news on that particular story. The Commonwealth has dropped, however, the Misinformation and Disinformation Bill, which of course included opinion and comment in the definition of information, because the opposition party and sufficient crossbencher senators flagged that they would vote against it. The social media minimum age bill is still on foot in federal parliament, however. It was debated yesterday in the lower house, and a campaign has been running to convince the Liberal opposition to reject it. It was sent to committee last Thursday and given 25 hours for public submissions. In that, with no notice, in that 25 hours, we got a record 15,000 emails sent to the committee. On Monday, a 3-hour public hearing was held with only 5 organisations, non-government, represented, and none from a human rights background. So this week, emails have targeted Liberal senators in particular, as the party has been deciding how to vote. So the biggest concern for our purposes is the encroachment into online privacy and the reality that every user of social media would need to have some kind of a digital ID to use the service, the social media service, in order to prevent under 16-year-olds from using it. So that has serious privacy implications, especially given the overreach of the Australian E-Commissioner. Yesterday, following New Zealand's review of the impact of puberty blockers on children and its subsequent retreat from them, Senator Pauline Hanson from the One Nation Party asked the Senate for the 5th time to call an inquiry into the experimental use of puberty blockers on children. Every time so far, this request has been blocked by the Labor Party, the Greens, and relevant crossbenchers. So she's asking for an inquiry into matters such as the dangers posed by puberty blockers, as evidenced by the poor quality and inconclusive research on their safety and efficacy, and the inadequacy of Australian safeguards compared with the more precautionary approaches adopted now in Australia, New Zealand, other countries. Some good news to finish on. A piece was published in The Australian last Thursday by Jenny Lindsay titled The Impact of the Trans Debate on Biological Women, with the subheadline of Extreme psychological, social, economic and democratic harms are being experienced in country after country by women who oppose gender identity ideology and its activism. It's Great that this can be published in a national newspaper with a circulation of around 4.4 million people. It's the most popular daily and weekly newspaper in the country. In it, among other things, she rejects the focus given to us of fixating on trans people and argues that the focus needs to be recentered, that we are concerned with women. Lindsay says women who have been hounded in the gender wars hold three core beliefs: that women are materially definable as a category of human being. We are adult human females. We believe that on that basis, women are legislatively, culturally, and politically important with our own set of needs, rights, and concerns, i.e., single-sex services, sports, lesbian-only associations, etc. And finally, we believe that women should have an unfettered right to freedom of speech and assembly on all issues, but particularly on issues that affect us profoundly. And she calls out the lack of legislative leadership. The piece is well worth a read, and I'll pop an archived version in the chat. Thanks very much.
Hello from Canada. In recent news, sex offenders will no longer be permitted to change their legal names in the province of Ontario. According to Solicitor General Michael Kersner, the changes to Christopher's Law will also require convicted sex offenders to disclose their email and social media accounts and report any changes to their usernames. It will also impose stricter travel rules, including a requirement to report new passports or driver's licenses. Christopher's Law is named for 11-year-old Christopher Stevenson, who was murdered by a convicted sex offender on Father's Day in 1988. The changes are meant to prevent sex offenders from distancing themselves from the heinous crimes they've committed. Redux reported last week that a British Columbia mother was told to be more inclusive after reporting to the staff at her local public pool that a man in a child's bikini was showering with her 10-year-old daughter and her friend in the women's change room. After the girls finished swimming, they went to shower. Well, mother Angie Tyrell waited for them in the bathroom area of the change room. The girls suddenly ran out of the shower area to Tyrell, whispering that there was a man showering with them. Tyrell instructed the girls to change in the washroom cubicles. She then saw the man enter the changing area, where a teenage girl who was naked from the waist up hurriedly covered herself and fled into a toilet stall. Tyrell says the man, who was muscular and had a hairy chest and back, was wearing what appeared to be a pink child's bikini, which was adorned with princess tiaras, sparkles, and frills. Tyrell then approached the pool staff to report the disturbing incident, but said they were dismissive. She decided to go up higher with her complaint, reaching out to the assistant manager of the pool, who, after some back and forth, told her that gender identity is a protected characteristic under the BC Human Rights Code and that they were aiming to create an inclusive and welcoming environment for all pool visitors. Except women and girls, I guess. This is the second publicized case involving a trans-identified man using the women's restroom at a public recreation center on Vancouver Island. In 2023, there was an incident of a convicted sex offender lurking in the women's change room for several days. He was confronted by a mother after she witnessed him peering under a bathroom stall to watch her young daughter as she used the toilet. This mother was threatened with arrest after she chased him out of the bathroom and was vindicated only when it was revealed that the man had recently been released from prison on a sex crime charge. The Red Tent Collective reports that a Quebec man who murdered his wife and 2 young children is now claiming that his wife, who was stabbed 20 times, killed herself and the children, who were 2 and 5, and then burned her house down, I guess, because he also burned the house. Since committing the murders, Mohammed Balouz has decided that he is a woman. As a result, he's being held at the now infamous Leclerc Detention Facility, a women's prison. This is the same prison where female guards reported being forced to strip search men who identify as women and who were being lewd and overtly sexual during searches. In June of 2020, Borderland Pride of Emo Township in Ontario requested that the town declare June as Pride Month and display a rainbow flag for 1 week. The township refused, resulting in a years-long legal battle. The Ontario Human Rights Tribunal has just ruled in favor of Borderland Pride, forcing the township to pay them $10,000 and the mayor, Harold McQuaker, to pay them $5,000. In addition to the compensation, the tribunal also ordered McQuaker and the chief administrative officer of the municipality to complete a Human Rights 101 training course offered by the Ontario Human Rights Commission within 30 days. Evidently, it's no longer acceptable to remain silent on what they call 2S LGBTQIA++ issues in Canada. Enthusiastic participation is now being forced upon Canadians under threat of legal action, fines, and mandatory re-education. And that's all I have today.